Glad to see you all. All of you that I can see anyway. Can't see you folks online, but welcome to our study of Matthew's Gospel. We're getting back into it this morning at chapter 24. I think we've covered everything in chapter 23 sufficiently. Anybody got any alibis for 23? You want to go back and look at anything in chapter 23? If not, we'll go right to 24. This is one of the most controversial chapters in the Bible. Although it breaks down to two pretty simple truths. Just figuring out which parts go to which of those truths might be the biggest challenge. But I have my opinion. You probably have yours. And we'll allow them to be different. The Lord knows what's the truth. But we're going to need to do some reading to start off with. Chapter 24, Matthew 24, verses 1 through 14. Who would like to read 1 through 14? All right, Corey and then Janie. Janie, you can take 15 to 28. And we need to go ahead and finish out the whole thing, so let's do 29 to 35. Actually, that's not the whole thing. That's the first part of the whole thing. Who's got 29 to 35? Who will do that one? All right, Steve. We got readers. Corey, Janie, and Steve, we're ready to go. Let's read the first part of the 24th chapter of Matthew's Gospel.
He went to the temple and was walking away when his disciples came up to him to call his attention to his buildings. Do you see all these things? He asked. Truly I tell you, not one stone here will be left on another. Everyone will be thrown down. As Jesus was sitting on the Mount of Olives, the disciples came to him privately. Tell us, they said. When will this happen, and what will be the sign of your coming and of the end of the age? Jesus answered, watch out that no one deceives you, for many will come in my name, claiming I am the Messiah, and will deceive many. You will hear of wars and rumors of wars, but see to it that you are not alarmed. Such things must happen, but the end is still to come. Nation will rise against nation, and kingdom against kingdom. There will be famines and earthquakes in various places. All these are the beginning of birth pains. Then you will be handed over to be persecuted and put to death, and you will be hated by all nations because of me. At that time, many will turn away from the faith and will betray and hate each other. And many false prophets will appear and deceive many people. Because of the increase of wickedness, the love of most will grow cold. But the one who stands firm to the end will be saved. And this gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come.
So when you see the abomination and desolation spoken of by the prophet Daniel stands in the holy place, let the reader understand. Then let those who are in Judea flee to the mountains. Let the one who is on the housetop not go down to take what is in his house. And let the one who is in the field not turn back to his cloak. And alas, for women who are pregnant, and for those who are nursing infants in those days, pray that your flight may not be in the winter or on a Sabbath. For then there will be a great tribulation, such as not been from the beginning of the world until now. No, and never will be. And if those days had not been cut short, no human being would be saved. But for the sake of the elect, those days will be cut short. Then if anyone says to you, look, here is the Christ, or there he is, do not believe it. For false Christs and false prophets will arise and perform great signs and wonders so as to lead astray, if possible, even the elect. See, I have told you beforehand. So if they say to you, look, he is in the wilderness, do not go out. If they say, look, he is in the inner rooms, do not believe it. For as the lightning comes from the east and shines as far as the west, so will be the coming of the Son of Man. Wherever the corpse is, there the vultures will gather.
Immediately after the tribulation of those days, the sun will be darkened, and the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from heaven, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. Then will appear in heaven the sign of the Son of Man, and then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming on the clouds of heaven with power and great glory. And he will send out his angels with a loud trumpet call, and they will gather his elect from the four winds, from one end of the heaven to the other. From the fig tree learn its lesson. As soon as its branch becomes tender and puts out its leaves, you know that summer is near. So also, when you see all these things, you know that he is near at the very gates. Truly I say to you, this generation will not pass away until all of these things take place. Heaven and earth will pass away, but my words will not pass away.
Very good. Thank you all for reading. One of the things that Steve just read at the end of his reading is in verse 34. We have seen this before in chapter 23. It's where Jesus refers to this generation. Everything is going to come on this generation. If you go back to chapter 23 and verse 36, Jesus is talking about the woes that are going to come on those who have behaved alike. He described in chapter 23, verses 13 through 29, the woes. Woe to you, woe to you, woe to you because you do this, woe to you because you do that. And then he talks about how they have slain the prophets. God sent prophets, and they slain the prophets. From the blood of Abel to the blood of Zechariah, whom they slew where? Anybody remember? It's right there in the text. Between the altar and the temple. Is that what he says? Yes, there in verse 35. So right there in God's holy place, they killed one of the prophets that he sent. And Jesus is saying, this generation is so wicked, all these things are going to come on you. It's my opinion that everything Jesus is talking about in the first part of chapter 24 is concerning the destruction of Jerusalem. That's what I believe he's talking about there. And these two times he says this generation, those are two of the major keys or clues that lead me to believe that. Another thing that leads me to believe he's talking about a very local, localized judgment is the fact that he describes, you can see all these signs coming. He will later say in verse 36 and following, of that day and hour nobody knows, not even the Son of Man, not the angels in heaven, and there won't be any signs. He doesn't describe any signs connected with the final coming, the final judgment. I know a lot of people are talking about all the signs that are going on today, but believe me, when I was 20 years old, they were talking about all the signs that were going on when I was 20 that were the fulfillment of all the same prophecies that they're saying are being fulfilled right now. So it's always the same. You guys remember, you got to be old to remember him. Hal Lindsey wrote a book, Late Great Planet Earth. From that book was made a movie, and it was pretty fantastic about all the Bible prophecies that are coming to pass. The only problem was everything was going to be fulfilled. Was it 1988? It was a date way back then, and it didn't happen, and so everything got kind of quiet. Nobody talked much about Hal Lindsey for a long time. So that's just the way it is. Now, God had said through Ezekiel, when you've got a prophet and he prophesies and it doesn't come true, he's a false prophet. Don't listen to him. So all these ideas that take Matthew 24 and try to apply it to the last coming of Christ, the final coming of Christ, it just doesn't stand up to the test of legitimate interpretation. Everything he's talking about is local. Why would you flee to the mountains during the final coming? Why would you be worried whether or not you or your family member is pregnant, or whether or not God's going to come on the Sabbath day? All those things indicate a local judgment, and that judgment was going to be on Jerusalem that Jesus said would come in that generation. Jesus said this about 33 AD, and when was Jerusalem destroyed? 70 AD. So just a scad, you all know how much a scad is, don't you? Just a scad less than 40 years, which is generally a Bible generation. So that fits the narrative perfectly. Some of these things I don't completely understand what he's talking about. Perhaps the one, Excuse me, goodness. I know in verse 29, he's talking about, he's using the imagery from the Old Testament. For example, read verse 29 where it says, sun will be darkened, the moon will not give its light, and the stars will fall from the sky, and the powers of the heavens will be shaken. If you go back to Isaiah 13, and this always helps me so much when looking at the prophetic utterances that we're reminded of in the New Testament. You go back and look at the original. What did the original mean? Isaiah 13, verse 1, is very clear. The oracle concerning Babylon. This is about Babylon. This isn't the oracle concerning the end of time or the final coming of Christ. This is the oracle about Babylon, which Isaiah, the son of Amos, saw. And he talks about all through this chapter the destruction of Babylon, God coming on Babylon to bring judgment against her. Look at verse 10. For the stars of heaven and their constellations will not flash forth their light. The sun will be dark when it rises, and the moon will not shed its light. Thus I will punish the world for its evil and the wicked for their iniquity. I'll also put an end to the arrogance of the proud and abase the haughtiness of the ruthless. I will make mortal man scarcer than pure gold, and mankind than the gold of Ophir. Therefore I will make the heavens tremble, and the earth will be shaken from its place at the fury of the Lord in the day of his burning anger. And then he says in verse 17, in this same line of judgment, I'm going to stir up the Medes against them, who will not value silver or take pleasure. So what kind of a judgment is he talking about? He's talking about a judgment where he stirs up one country against another because Babylon's been evil, but he uses this language that sounds like, wow, how could that happen? Is that literal? And it's not. It's figurative. There are several things that we say, you know, don't make me come in there, I'm going to tear your head off, or I'm going to snatch you bald-headed. There's all kinds of things we say to try to get people's attention, and that's what God is doing here. It's going to be so bad, the stars won't even give their light, the earth's going to tremble, the sun will be dark when it rises. Not literal.
That actually happened, what would we think? We'd be scared to death.
Right.
I mean, trembling with fear.
Sure. Because that's not the way the universe works. God does say in the final judgment what's going to happen to the universe. It's going to melt with a fervent heat. So that's the final judgment of God. But this is not the final judgment. This judgment in chapter 13 of Isaiah is coming on Babylon. Look at chapter 19 of Isaiah. This is one of my favorites. The oracle concerning Egypt. Behold, the Lord is riding on a swift cloud, and he's about to come to Egypt. You can just see him up there, a big supersonic jet cloud loaded down with, well, I'd say Mark IIs. Those are snake eyes. Okay, Steve's chuckling. Those are 500-pound iron bombs. They'll level anything. Anyway, God's coming on a cloud to Egypt. He's coming in judgment on Egypt. That's not about the last final coming. That's about his judgment on Egypt. And so when Jesus is talking about this destruction of Jerusalem, he uses the same kind of language appropriately, that this is going to be a big event. Then he says in verse 30, now we're back to Matthew 24, sorry. Matthew 24, verse 30. And then the sign of the Son of Man will appear in the sky. Then all the tribes of the earth will mourn, and they will see the Son of Man coming in the clouds of the sky with power and great glory. That sure sounds like the final judgment, but I don't believe it is. I believe he's talking about the establishment of the church, even when he says in verse 31, or perhaps especially when he says in verse 31, he will send forth his angels with a great trumpet, and they will gather together his elect from the four winds, from one end of the sky to the other. Now, I'm not sure, but I believe he's still talking about things concerning the destruction of Jerusalem, and this going out of the gospel is part of it. One of the things he had said earlier in verse 14, that the gospel of the kingdom is going to be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all the nations, and then the end will come. And you may remember from last week, we talked about what Paul wrote in Colossians chapter 1. What did Paul say twice in Colossians chapter 1? Anybody recall? Well, we can go there and look at it. Colossians chapter 1. He said the word had been preached to all the world. He laid that down very clearly, almost as if it was to help us understand and make connection with what Jesus was teaching here in Matthew 24. Colossians chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. Because of the hope laid up for you in heaven, of which you previously heard in the word of truth, the gospel which has come to you just as in all the world. So that's Colossians chapter 1, verses 5 and 6. Then go down, same chapter, to verse 23. If indeed you continue in the faith firmly established and steadfast and not moved away from the hope of the gospel that you have heard, which was proclaimed in all the creation under heaven, and of which I, Paul, was made a minister. So Paul writes in this letter to the church of Colossae that the gospel's gone out into the whole heaven, whole creation under heaven. About when was this letter written? Best we can tell, about 60 A.D. So about 10 years prior to the destruction of Jerusalem, Paul writes that the gospel's gone out into the whole world. Jesus says that's going to happen before the end comes, or that's going to be just prior to the end. And then Jerusalem is taken out of the way. Not only is Jerusalem taken out of the way in AD 70, something else very key to Judaism is also taken out of the way. Well, several things, but one thing in particular, the records of the priesthood. If you don't have records to prove you are of the tribe of Levi to serve as a Levitical priest, or from the family of Aaron to serve as an Aaronic priest, then what were the Aaronic priests? Not ironic. Aaronic in the sense that they were of Aaron's family. Those were the high priests. If you don't have somebody who can prove his lineage through Aaron, you do not have a high priest. If you can't prove your connection through Levi, you can't prove that you're qualified to take care of the temple or the tabernacle. Of course, there wasn't a temple after AD 70. But the records were gone, and that was huge. It's like God said, all right, I'm setting up Judaism on Mount Sinai when I give the law to Moses. I'm going to create, I have created these people. That's what he did through Abraham. He called Abraham and said, I'm going to make of you a great nation, and that's what he did. A great nation came out of Egypt when only 70 to 75 went down into it. He gave them the law. Paul said that law was a schoolmaster to bring us to Christ. That's exactly what happened. Christ came. He was rejected as it was prophesied. He was crucified. And the church was established. 40 years later, a generation later, almost 40 years, Judaism is taken off the map. There is no way you can practice Judaism according to the law any longer. Now, Jerusalem had been conquered before. The temple had been destroyed before, but those records had never been destroyed. And so Judaism came back and was reborn, so to speak. It never really ended, but everything was reestablished. And when you look at that aspect of history, it's really something fantastic that the Jews could go off into captivity, and a heathen pagan king would say to them, all right, I want you guys to go back and rebuild Jerusalem. I want you to go back. Here's money to rebuild the temple. The Persian government is going to finance the reestablishment of Judaism in its native land and native city, and that's exactly what happened. That's, wow, how does that happen? But this time God says, okay, Judaism has fulfilled its purpose. We're taking it out of the way. My kingdom has been established, just like I had Daniel write about, and that's what Matthew 24 is all about. God's kingdom is established through his Son, and once it's been established in a generation of time, he's taking Judaism completely out of the way. Did I say Judaism? That Christianity, the church has been established through Jesus, and then in a generation's time, he's taking Judaism out of the way, and that's what chapter 24 is all about. Now, that's a lot of me talking. Anybody got any questions about this? Yes, Don.
I'm agreeing with what you're saying, but to add to that, verses 27 and 28 are building up to the Jewish system is dead. And that is, 28 says, wherever the corpse is, the vultures will gather. It's like saying the Jewish system is dead and the vultures are ready to gather it up. It can't go any further. It's gone. But the genealogy's gone. And then it's moving on into 29 through 31, where you're saying, 29 uses that imagery. When kings fall and kings rises, and when nations fall and nation rises, it uses that imagery. So now the Jewish system is dead for sure. It can't move on. The vultures are going to eat it up, and the church is ready to go unhindered throughout the world, which is 31. Angels can be translated as messengers. As messengers can go to the four corners of the earth. That's the gospel being preached and throughout the whole world. And as you said, you already mentioned, it's been preached throughout the whole world in that sense. So now it can go unhindered.
That's my best understanding of it.
1,000 years actually begins rather than the church.
Right.
1,000 years of, in Revelation, 1,000 years is now in amillennialism. The church is thriving. God is reigning over his saints with those people who rose from the dead that were persecuted in Revelations. First resurrection, they went to heaven and they're reigning with Christ over the church now until the 1,000-year ended. And I know I'll get into too much if I say this, but that was where, since we're here, 27 through 10 now talk about when that 1,000 years ends. Satan's going to be loosed, and we don't talk about that much because it's kind of obscure to us, because that is more of a futuristic type thing, and we don't know whether that's going to be when he's loosed to deceive all the nations, whether that's going to be a week, whether that's going to be 3 years, whether that's going to be 100 years. Even when in Revelation, when they talk about the church overcoming the beast, which is the Rome, it's 350 years before Rome actually fell. So, it's like, yeah, all that stuff took place, but Rome didn't actually fall for a time. So we don't know that 7 through 10, when Satan is released, how will he deceive all the nations? It's my personal belief that during this 1,000 years, he's chained up and he can't deceive all the nations, but he can deceive a few. I mean, every once in a while you'll see it seems like to me, you see what happened in Revelation rise up over and over again, like in religious leaders not letting people have the scriptures for so long, and saying, no, we'll interpret these for you, since that time. And then you see it in other nations rising. You'll see it in Hitler's regime. He rose up, and it was so similar to a beast. It's similar to Satan rising up in Rome. It's similar to him being able to rise up in places, but not the whole world. Whereas 7 through 10 seems to be like he'll be loosed and can deceive the whole world. And a lot of people, some of the books I've read show that, well, it may not last really long. They don't say much, but it's like, well, at first he's got to deceive the whole world, and he's going to surround the whole camp of the saints, and then God's going to breathe his fire down and destroy them all. Well, sometimes to me that seems like a period of time, and although we're not looking for signs when that time will, Revelation is a book that tells us if they could handle the persecution to death, some of them will die, lose everything they had. They may have to give up everything they own not to worship incorrect, do things God's way. They could lose everything they have. We too can be strong in those situations when we look back at that we may have to lose everything. Right. And that's hard for us Western Christians, in America, with the American dream and everything, that we actually might, as it always says in Matthew and on, we may have to give up everything to continue to follow Christ. And I don't know that we're ready for that. We need to be.
That's what
It may happen now, it may happen soon, it may happen in 10,000 years, I don't know, but at some point that's going to happen. And we all need to be ready and hang on loosely to what our material possessions on this earth and be ready to let them go. I don't think we always are. I know I'm not. I know I struggle with that.
Right.
I have to
What's
worry
already
about
happening.
that a lot.
See, we read this, I say we, I read this, and in my mind, I'm thinking, okay, I'm thinking as an American Christian, when is this going to happen? Well, I don't foresee this happening anywhere soon, but what if I was a Nigerian Christian and I'm reading this? Or what if I was a Chinese Christian and I'm reading this? And I'm thinking, wow, persecution. I'm being persecuted now. It's happening in a lot of places in the world, and it may be happening here before we know it. We don't know, as Don says, what the future holds, but here in the Revelation is a picture of, it's kind of like, I don't want to give you any kind of an idea that I minimize the message of the Revelation in its detail, but it's sort of like the old stories, like Goldilocks. What was the purpose of the story of Goldilocks? Was there a moral to it? Well, don't be a silly girl that goes into people's houses and messes with their stuff and tears things up. Leave people's things alone. What was the moral of all the other stories? They all had a moral. And there were, you might say, well, who does the bear represent? Well, no, that's not the point. What does the stool mean? Well, that's not the point. There's a message there, and sometimes those things have very specific meanings, biblically speaking, but other times it's just a general statement to let you know, like the sun's going to rise and it's going to be dark. Okay, what's that mean? That means what's happening is going to be really big, but the sun's not going to be dark literally. That's a figurative thing. When the Lord says he owns the cattle on 1,000 hills, what does that mean? Psalm 50. He owns them all. You don't get to hill number 1001 and find cows that don't belong to God. That's not the point. It's a figure. It's a statement of figure. And we understand that because we talk in those terms all the time. And there's a lot of that going on in the Revelation. And the interesting part of studying Revelation is figuring out, all right, what's literal and what's figurative? What is a sign? And when we see numbers like that, like 1,000, okay, that seems to be a sign. What's it a sign of? Now, Jesus doesn't connect Matthew 24 with the Revelation. That's what happens in a lot of denominational teachings, but it comes up because they want to come back and bring Matthew 24 into Revelation 20, and that's a disconnect there. Now, the final coming, Jesus doesn't get into until verse 36, I believe, of Matthew 24, when he says, but of that day and hour, no one knows. So he's giving us this picture of Jerusalem being destroyed, and he says, as a matter of fact, he talks about two tribulations. We didn't talk about that, but look at verse 9. Matthew 24, verse 9. Then they will deliver you to tribulation and will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. So who's he talking about? He's obviously talking about Christians, people who embrace Jesus as the Messiah. You're going to be hated, you're going to be killed. But then you drop down to verse 21. Then there will be a great tribulation, such as has not occurred since the beginning of the world until now, nor ever will be. Who's that tribulation coming on? That's coming on Jerusalem. That's coming on the city, if you will, that persecuted God's people up in verse 9. You made my people tribulate. I'm going to bring a tribulation on you that the world has never seen before or ever will. And that's essentially the message of the Revelation. It's the same idea. Rome, you've persecuted my people. I'm going to persecute you. I'm going to wipe you off the face of the earth. And so Rome ceased to be a power along about from 410 to 475 AD. It was just taken over. It caved in. It's interesting, and this has been, I don't want to use the word prophesied, but it's been mentioned by others through the centuries, that nations typically don't cave because they are overtaken by other nations. Nations typically cave because they crumble from within, morally speaking. And to some degree, I see that happening in America. Not altogether. The more I watch TV, the more I think it's true. The less I watch TV, the more I see the reality of decent people trying to make their way in this world and do good things. I live in Oklahoma. I live in the Oklahoma City area like you do, but I don't live in fear. I'm not constantly worried that somebody's going to kick in my door and rob me and take my things, or come in with a badge and take me to prison for being a Christian. I can drive up and down the highways. I know that if I have trouble, I can call the police, I can call the fire department, I can call the paramedics. And even if I don't call anybody and I'm broke down by the highway, what's likely to happen? Somebody's going to stop and say, hey, what, you okay? Well, you need something? Here's a bottle of water. Here's a phone. Call somebody. That's generally the world we live in right here. Isn't that great? But it's not that way everywhere. And Jesus is talking about a time when the church is going to be persecuted, and when that happens, he's going to take things in hand and persecute the persecutors. He's always done that. He's always done that. That's why we read in Isaiah 13 what we read about Babylon. That's why we read in Isaiah 19 what we read about Egypt. God bringing judgment on those nations for causing hardship on his people. It's always been that way. When God called Abraham, do you remember what he said? He said, those who bless you, I will bless. Those who curse you, I will curse. Now, that was a promise he made to Abraham, but I believe that's behavior that God practices on a constant basis regarding his people. You bless his people, he'll bless you. You curse his people, he'll curse you. And do we do any differently? How do you feel when one of your children moves off to a strange town and then you find out their neighbors came over with cookies? How do you feel about those neighbors? Oh man, I love those people. I've never even seen them. I don't know their names, but I love them because they were good to my kids. Conversely, somebody is unkind or hateful or cheats one of your children. You wonder if you're going to wind up in the paper because they hurt your kid. Now, you and we don't have the perfect sense of justice that God has, and we don't have the perfect ability to bring justice as God does, but he's God, and he does, and he will. And he shows us that in Matthew 24, but it's nothing new. He's been showing us that all along through the prophets. You read the prophets, you see the same thing.
Yeah, not only, when you read the prophets, not only do they prophesy about captivity of Judah going into Babylon, but you also read about all the other surrounding countries that took advantage of his people when they were still there in Israel. And, Moab and Edom and the Ammonites and all those.
Right.
He acts justly against them, which means he basically destroys them.
For every one that abused his people, you go back to Amos. That's what Amos says. Amos chapter 1, verse 3. Thus says the Lord, for 3 transgressions of Damascus, and for 4, I will not rebuke its punishment. Verse 6. For 3 transgressions, that's a really bad transgression, is a transgression. Transgression of Gaza, and for 4. For 3 transgressions of Tyre, and for 4. Why the 3 and the 4 thing? It's like 3's enough, but you've even gone past 3. 3 seems to be, all right, I'll give you to 3. 3 strikes and you're out, but they've gone to 4. All these nations have gone to 4. He does that. How many? 8 different nations. And then he does it for Judah and for Israel. You guys mess up, I'm coming on you too. So that's God. He is the judge. He's put in each of us a sense of justice, and we understand when things have gone wrong, and we long to come back to what is just. Not social justice. When you throw the word social in there, you mess it up. Justice is justice for everyone, no matter who. Some have observed, and I think rightly so, that what has made America great is that we are a nation under law, and we eventually got around to the idea of understanding and making the law apply to everyone. Some say, well, in the beginning, the law only applied to white men. Well, yeah, but those white men kept reading that document, and by the way, it wasn't all the white men, and they said, all right, we need to apply this law. Why do you think we had a civil war? What was that all about? Trying to come back to that Constitution. Why does the military oath say, I will swear to defend the Constitution? I was surprised. I didn't swear an oath to defend the United States of America. I swore an oath to defend the Constitution. That's the oath they're still giving out. Why is that? Because we understand that's what holds us together. It's that law. It's just like the law for Israel. You've got to have law, you've got to have code, you've got to have a standard. That's what's wrong with the world today. That's why everybody's so confused. We've got all these different standards. Well, this is what I think's right. Yeah, well, I don't think so. I think this is right. And until people realize that God's got the only standard that's right, there's going to be confusion. Things are going to be messed up.
There's also the statement, lawful orders.
What's that now?
Lawful orders.
Yes, lawful orders.
That's in there.
And when you've got a lawful order, what do? You better keep it. And some of those orders, in fact, the more I look at them, the more I think all of those orders have a natural mechanics to them that if I disobey, it's not just that I'm going to be in trouble from God, it's just also that I'm going to be in trouble from the natural order that is set. If you let the oil in your car's engine get too old or seep away so there's not sufficient clean oil, what's going to happen to your engine? That has nothing to do with your intentions about what you wanted to have happen. That has nothing to do with how much you care about the car. That simply is the nature of things. And it's the same in the spiritual world. If God's laws, if His precepts are neglected, there's going to be a price to pay. God may exact that price Himself, or it may just be built into the mechanics of the universe as He established it, that there's going to be a price to pay. That's the way it works all the time. Don?
Seems to me that from what you just said, everything I see in the Bible is always about some sort of political government. I mean, it's constantly in the Old Testament, kings persecuting God's people, doing something. It always seems like to be laws. You know, in Revelation, it was Rome attacking the church. We see it in all through the New Testament. I mean, Rome was part of, ones that killed the Christ, along with really what the Sadducees and Pharisees, more than a religious group, were more of a political group. They were in control of the people before Rome took over, and so they were really still in control of a lot of what they had to do then. And it seems like I'm always watching today, for at least America, when I see a political group, if they seem to be attacking the church. Now, I may see somebody creating, that doesn't seem like their morals are all that good, but if I see that, wow, they're helping the church, I can see how God can still use them to help the church. Because everything to me is about the church. I mean, it's, obviously the church is following Christ, but it's always a battle between the beast, or not the beast, but the dragon, so to speak, Satan against the bride.
Always.
He's always fighting the bride. And so we can kind of see that just from our history, not looking for signs, but knowing which direction we should go and seeing, wow, this people are They're attacking the church. They're trying to create laws so the church will be persecuted in some way, whether they, whatever it is, and you can see that in different people and who they seem to be following versus other people who are trying to create laws that seem to help the church thrive,
Right. It's the church now, but it's always been God's people or God's standards somewhere along the way. It started when? When did it start? Genesis chapter 3. The devil asks Eve, has God said you'll die? Oh, you'll not die. And you just follow that line from there on out. By the time you get to chapter 6, what's happening in Genesis chapter 6? People are so wicked, and it didn't start in Genesis 6. It started in chapter 5 when Lemuel said, hey, somebody harms me, I'm going to harm him 7 times over. It's this revenge thing. It's this, the sense of justice is no longer there. It's a sense of revenge. And people became so evil that God said, I'm wiping everybody out except for Noah and his family. And as soon as they get back on track and the world gets populated, then there's the Tower of Babel. What did people say at the Tower of Babel? God saw that as rebellion, what was happening there, and he said, I'm just going to scatter them over the face of the earth. Give them different languages, and they'll have to split off from each other, and that's what happened. And so finally we get to chapter 12, and God says, all right, it's time for me to call Abraham. I'm going to build my nation out of this man. And we're talking hundreds of years and thousands of years that God is constantly bringing his plan to fruition. But all along the way, what we see is what Don's talking about, this fight between everybody who's trying to do what's right and those who are trying to do what's wrong. Did God want to save Sodom and Gomorrah? Well, I asked the question wrong. Was God willing to save Sodom and Gomorrah? He was. Did Abraham want to save it? Abraham dealt with God. Lord, if there's 50 righteous people, I can just hear God in his mind. Yeah, if you can find 50, I'll save it. And Abraham, it's like Abraham going, I've been there. I'm not sure I can find 50. Lord, maybe if I found 40. How many to get him down to? I say how many did he get him down to, like Abraham somehow overcame God. But he said, if there's 10 righteous people, and God says, yeah, you can find 10. I won't destroy it. Did he find 10? He didn't find 10. So what did God do? It was judgment time. It was judgment time. And Lot got out, as we say, by the skin of his teeth. Mrs. Lot didn't make it. But what did Lot's daughters do to rectify the situation of our dad doesn't have any sons? They slept with him, and they had children by their father. That's where the Moabites and the Ammonites came from. And so we see these things in history, and God's giving us a picture of early earth history, and we wonder, why is everything so messed up? Crime and Antley. Just read the book. And if it's not the devil instigating evil, it's us. I heard one guy say years ago, and it just kind of pinged. He said, we give the devil too much credit. There's a lot of stuff I do on my own. I don't need the devil's help. I can be bad all by myself. How about you? And of course, you wonder, okay, well, was it really me? Yeah, I think it was really me. The devil wouldn't have hurt to have some influence in there, but Flip Wilson, what did he used to say when he was Geraldine? The devil made me do it. That was her line. Well, sometimes I think there's less to it than the devil, but it's always the devil. Anyway, that's what we're seeing in 24. There's evil and there's good. God says, I'm going to punish the evil, but the good, he says in verse, I didn't mention this, but I should have. Verse 6, what's he say? He says, do not be afraid. Do not be afraid. That's the constant reminder of Jesus. Don't be afraid. Don?
4.
Okay.
After that, there's a clear contrast. He goes, but that day and hour, no one knows.
Right.
And then now there's no signs. He's just going to show it. It's just going to.
On a day when we think he won't.
So we're not looking for signs anymore.
Yeah.
And then he goes on into the next chapters on be ready all the time. Be ready all the time.
Lord willing, we'll try to pick up on that next week. Appreciate it.